Good morning. Hello, everyone. I'm Hannah Carden, and I'm the teaching pastor here at Urban Village Church, coming to you from my very messy, because it is well-loved and well-used, kitchen. And there's a reason that I'm in my kitchen. It is because we are having a very special online worship today. As you know, every so often we do choose your own adventure worships in this pandemic time, where we worship where God is, which is everywhere, where we deliberately challenge ourselves to have different modes of spiritual experience that can let the Holy Spirit come into our lives and show us what God is doing in all kinds of places. And today, some of our folks right now are out hiking in the woods. Some of our folks are on an LGBTQ history tour of Bronzeville, where they're going to eat at Pearl's Place. Some of our folks are doing fellowship and hangout at Grant Park with kids activities and games where they're learning LGBTQ history. Some of our folks are napping, and some of you are here with us about to bake some rainbow cookies. And I do want to say we've got ingredients lists on the Facebook page. We'll share them again. All of that stuff. We'd love for you to bake with us, to bake as we bake here this morning. And there's lots of substitutes in case you don't have something in the kitchen. This is one of the best parts about baking. You can make stuff up as you go along, and maybe it doesn't turn out great at the end, but you tried and it's still fun. But also, if you don't want to bake, you're still welcome to hang out. We will be discussing what's in the comments as we go through. We'll be helping each other out. And at the end, after the cookies go in the oven, we'll talk a little bit about the spirituality of baking and cooking, and how these everyday practices of nourishing ourselves and one another can become places of joy and of knowing God and of being formed towards Christ and who we are. And the person leading all us in that today is a wonderful member of the Urban Village community who many of you know, also becoming a candidate for ministry, just graduated from seminary, incredible in all ways, Red Holdridge. So let's welcome Red. Everybody clap or leave a comment. Yay!
Hello, everybody. Like Hannah said, my name is Red Holdridge, and I'm so happy to be here this morning to share with you one of my very favorite things in the whole world, which is baking. And like Hannah said, we're going to bake some cookies, and then we're going to have a little conversation and talk about baking as a spiritual practice and what that means for me, and also what that can mean for you potentially. And I really hope that you'll join us. Like Hannah said, the ingredient list is all on the Facebook page. Also, I think she'll probably put it in the comments. Hannah's going to be my backup buddy today. So she's in the background, doing all the things and making sure I see your comments and making sure you see all the things that you need to see to make good cookies. My name, like Hannah said, my name is Red Holdridge. My pronouns are they, them. They're in the little box over here. The screen is opposite, so I'm kind of disoriented a little bit. Okay, so today we're gonna make one of my favorite recipes, and one of the reasons I picked it is because I know it by heart, so I don't have to try and juggle a recipe and looking at you folks. And it's a chocolate chip cookie recipe that is vegan. I'm vegan, so everything I bake is vegan. And my goal is always to make it so that you can't tell the difference between vegan and traditional baking. The fun part about this also is that you can kind of sub in this recipe, you can sub in regular traditional ingredients. And so we're going to move through this kind of step by step, and I'm going to go through everything as we go along, and you can feel free to jump in. It's a really quick recipe, so if you miss the beginning, or if, as we go along, we can always kind of go back again through it. So the first thing that you're going to need is your fat. So it's going to be coconut oil or vegan butter or dairy butter or vegetable shortening or margarine or any of those types of things, lard if you're really old school. And you're going to need 1/3 of a cup of that. And so I have a little stick here, and 1/3 of a cup is 5.3 tablespoons. So 5 tablespoons works. And maybe just tack a little bit on. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And a little bit more. And some baking sticks will have the amount on the side. This one does. And this one actually just says 5 tablespoons. So that little bit of 1/3 is not gonna make a big difference. And you can Really what you want is room temperature, whatever you're doing. If it was in your refrigerator, stick it in your microwave quick on defrost. Don't put it on the regular because that's just going to melt the whole thing. Melted butter is fine too if you really need it to be liquid, or if you accidentally microwave it for too long, you can certainly use melted. That's fine. It's going to make your cookies spread more. That's the big little baking tip for you there. The colder your butter, the colder your fat, the more cake-like your cookies are going to be. So we're going to do a third of a cup of butter, and then a third of a cup of brown sugar, and a third of a cup of white sugar. And in the recipe that got put on Facebook, it says organic. It doesn't have to be organic. That was what the author of the recipe used. But certainly if you have regular brown sugar, it's fine. That's what I have, is regular brown sugar. So Domino, not organic. So you're going to make sure you do a packed cup of the brown sugar. That is pretty standard baking practice, but if you've never baked before, pack it down. And you're going to do that into your bowl. And I'm using my KitchenAid. You can certainly use a bowl and a spoon. That is totally fine. A bowl and a wooden spoon or a spatula, that will work just as well. These cookies are pretty flexible. You can kind of do whatever you want. I'm going to use my stand mixer because make it fluffier. So if you have a stand mixer or a hand mixer, you can use that, and it's less work for your arms, and it does make your ingredients incorporate better. But if all you have is a bowl and a spoon, use your bowl and spoon. That's totally fine. Sometimes when I make these cookies and I don't feel like dragging this thing out of the closet, I just use a bowl and spoon in it, and they will still come out delicious. So we have a third of a cup of butter, a third of a cup of brown sugar, and then we need a third of a cup of white sugar. If you don't have brown sugar or you don't have white sugar, you can use the same. It's going to make them look a little different. But really what's important is that you get your ratio of butter and sugar together. So then now we have our third of a cup of white sugar, third of a cup of brown sugar, and we're going to just beat that up together. So like I said, if you have a bowl and a spoon, just give it a good beat until it all looks the same. And you want everything to be nice and incorporated so that it's all together. So I'm going to do this on my mixer. And like I said, you're just looking for it to all look the same, and it's going to be kind of creamy. And so this is what this is called, creaming together your butter and sugar. So you just kind of wait for it to all look like a light brown color. And it should be all mushed together. So I'll show you. So it should look like this pretty much. And like I said, if you're using a spoon and a bowl, it might take a little bit longer to get to this part, but really you just want it to look kind of all one thing. No pieces of butter, no pieces of sugar loose in the bottom of a bowl. So once you have that, we are going to do our milk and vanilla, so our liquids. So again, I am using vegan ingredients, so I have soy milk. Regular milk works fine. Any kind of plant-based milk is going to work absolutely fine. And if you're in a pinch and you don't have very much milk, or you don't have enough, or you don't have any, you could use a little bit of water or a little bit of creamer, if you have coffee creamer with water in it, just water it down a little bit. And so we are going to go with a quarter of a cup of whatever your milk is. And that, so I'm using a regular, this is actually a dry measuring cup. You can use a liquid measuring cup, which looks like this. So if you have one of these guys, you can do that. Usually the first marker on this is the half cup. So I like to use the dry measuring cup, but just because then I get exactly the right amount, because you can't overfill this because it's liquid. It'll just spill out. So again, if all you have is a liquid measuring cup, that's totally fine. So we're going to put this, and I do it over the bowl because I'm very clumsy, and I definitely have spilled many things in my kitchen. So we're going to do it over the bowl right to the top. And that was like exactly as much as I had left in this. So that worked out great. And you're going to tip it into your bowl. And then you're going to do your vanilla. If you don't have vanilla, a lot of people, like if you don't bake, you probably don't have vanilla in your house. You don't need it. I love vanilla in my cookies. So this is one place where you can do whatever you want. So you can put like as much. Oh, thank you, Red. Thank you, Red. Thank you, Mindy. I'm reading my own name. Thank you, Mindy. So you can use imitation vanilla, regular vanilla. If you have almond extract, you can use that. If you really like almond flavoring, you can use anything to kind of give it a little bit more fun of a flavor. And since these are Pride cookies, they're going to be fun and fabulous no matter what you do. So because it's Pride. So you can show your true colors. I love vanilla. And I never measure my vanilla. I always just dump some of it in. So I think the recipe calls for like a teaspoon or a half a teaspoon. So it's just going to be like a little, like a glug or two, like just a little bit. And it's really hard to over vanilla something. So you're going to put some of that in there, and then you're going to beat it up again. If you're using a bowl, I highly recommend you use a whisk, which like this. This is a whisk. You can use a spoon, just go really slow or you're going to make a giant mess. So it's easier to use a whisk. If you don't have a whisk, just use your spoon, but go slow so that you don't end up with a mess. So we're going to give this a little mix. And I'm going to just scrape down the edges of my bowl to make sure that I get it all incorporated. And you're going to want to do that if you have a hand mixer, if you're using a hand mixer, which, fun fact, I don't actually own a hand mixer. I should. It's on my wedding registry if anybody out there wants to buy it for me. But yeah, a hand mixer, you're going to need to do the same thing. Just scrape it down. If you're using a bowl and a spatula, obviously you're doing that as you go. So we're just going to, again, make sure that it's all incorporated. And it's going to look really wet and loose. It's going to be very, like, sloppy. And that's what you want it to look like. So once you get that all incorporated, and I will show you, well, so you can see, like, it's just kind of wet and messy. So it's going to look, I don't know if I can even show you this because it's kind of really wet. So it's going to be really wet and messy. But that's fine because we're going to add some dry ingredients next. So the next thing that we need is you're going to need your teaspoon, tablespoons. We're going to do a half a teaspoon of baking soda and baking powder. So this is the fun thing about vegan baking is that a lot of times people are like, what do you use to replace the eggs? Well, we're not really replacing the eggs straight. Like, most vegan baking, you don't like really want to try and take a recipe and switch it all around. Like it's not going to work. I've tried it. And usually it comes out a disaster. It burns or it comes out all like loose and gross. But I will tell you a little bit of baking science, which is baking soda and baking powder are your leavenings. They make things rise. And that's one of the things that eggs also does. So in this recipe, we're using baking powder and baking soda, which you use for a lot of different baking anyway, sort of as a replacement, but there's no eggs in this recipe because it's a vegan recipe. So, but the nice thing is, even if you're not vegan, you probably have baking powder and baking soda in your house. So we're going to do a half a teaspoon of baking soda. And I have super fancy baking soda because I went away for a second there. But any kind of baking soda, your orange box, orange, baking Arm & Hammer, that is going to work just fine. Oh, and my battery's running low. Hang on one second. Should have plugged it in first. There we go. Okay. All right. Okay, so we're going to do half a teaspoon of baking powder and a half a teaspoon of baking soda. So baking powder is here. Again, any kind of baking powder, any kind of baking soda you have is totally fine. I'm going to tip both of those into your bowl. Another fun fact, if you don't have baking powder, you can make your own with cream of tartar and baking soda. But if you don't have baking powder, you probably don't have cream of tartar because that's like a more bakery thing. Although you might have some in the back of your cupboard that you used to make snickerdoodles once upon a time and you're like, I don't know what this is. You can make baking powder with it. So, okay, so we got our baking powder and our baking soda in the bowl, and then we're going to do salt. A lot of people try and take salt out of recipes because they're like, oh, trying to be healthy, trying to have less salt in your diet. I guarantee you, you could eat all of these cookies and the salt content is not going to be what screws you up. Salt in baking is very important. It gives things flavor. It helps things balance in the rise. It does all kinds of sciencey things. You don't want to cut out your salt in any baking that you do. This little bit of quarter of a teaspoon of salt that we're going to put in here is not going to affect your blood pressure, I promise. So we're going to do a quarter of a teaspoon of salt right into the bowl. And then last, and I always do the flour last just to make sure everything else gets incorporated because there's such small amounts of everything. And then the flour is obviously your biggest piece. So I put everything in the bowl first and then put the flour on top of it. And that way when I mix it, if something flies out of the bowl, it's flour and it's not that big a deal. If you put in a half a teaspoon of baking powder and then half of it flies out of your bowl, you're going to have a problem. So we're going to do a cup and a quarter of flour. And again, I'm using my like regular scoop, dry mix scoop because you can get it nice and level. And so you do want it like, that is one thing in baking, like you want your flour to be nice and accurate. You want it to be level. So we're going to tip 1 cup into the bowl. And then we're going to do a quarter cup, which is what I used for my milk. And again, same thing. You want it nice and level and you want it packed down. You want it to be nice. And you can use a butter knife. That's another thing you can use to level your measuring cup. It just so happens that my container also provides a nice level. So that's the flour. And so now you have your baking powder, baking soda, and your salt in your bowl with your flour. You're going to give it another mix. You're not going to mix it, don't mix it too much. You just really want everything incorporated together. And again, if you're mixing with your spoon, it might take a little bit longer, but you can definitely use a bowl and a spoon. You don't have to use a mixer like I am. It just saves you a little bit of time. And I am a spoonie. I have a chronic illness that makes doing anything by hand a lot harder for me. So I prefer my stand mixer. So there we go. So you can see the consistency of the batter here. It's pretty much just all one nice light brown color. It's nice and soft and everything looks the same. So it looks like cookie dough now. We've essentially made the base of chocolate chip cookie dough. Now comes the really fun part. Now comes the add-ins, the mix-ins. So if you saw the recipe in the chat or in Facebook, it says you can add whatever you want. So this is your time to really let your flag fly and do whatever you want to do. So we can put in M&Ms, which would be very appropriate for Pride. We can put in chocolate chips, which is the kind of standard. We can put in, and my favorite, so we can put in nuts, which I was really bummed we don't have walnuts. I love walnuts in my chocolate chip cookies, and I thought we had some, and we don't. So you can put nuts in, you can put walnuts in, you can put almonds in if you're feeling fancy. You could put in, any other kind of nut you wanted. You could put raisins in. You could put butterscotch chips, white chocolate chips, any kind of specialty chip, peanut butter chips. You can mix and match. You can do whatever you want in this recipe. You can put whatever you want in right now. And then we're also going to do, and then you'll see in the recipe, we also had sprinkles, a couple of sprinkles. And so there's a couple options for that. So we're going to do our mixed ins first. So I have my chocolate chips and I'm going to dump in. So I think I don't even know what the recipe calls for. This is another thing that I never measure. I just do until it looks like it's enough. And it's really up to you. If you love chocolate chips, put a bunch in, put the whole bag in if you want. I think it's 10 ounces, which is like a normal size bag. Of course, I have a jumbo bag. So I'm going to just tip some in there until it looks like enough. That looks like enough to me. And then we're going to give it a mix. And then you don't want a rubber band in there. So I'm going to do this part by hand. So especially if you have a hand mixer, you do not want to do this part with a hand mixer. You're just going to beat your chocolate chips up, and nobody wants beat up chocolate chips. They're going to break apart. And even with a stand mixer like this, it's still going to break your chocolate chips more than it's going to like actually incorporate them into your mix. So you're just going to kind of give it a stir until you feel like it's pretty evenly distributed. And no matter what, I have been baking since I was like 4. And no matter how well you think you do it, when you start scooping, your cookies are going to have less chocolate chips. And when you're done at the end, those are the ones that are going to have the most. And that's just the way that it goes. It's baking. It's not science. It's baking inevitability. I don't know. So then the last thing you're going to do, you have your pride flag in a bottle, your rainbow sprinkles. I love sprinkles. Sprinkles make everything better. No one is mad about sprinkles. So you can mix them in with your other ingredients right now. Sometimes, depending on the sprinkles, they might melt a little bit and you'll end up with like green cookies. That is fun in and of its own self. You can pour them into a bowl and kind of dip your cookie into it and then put it on your baking sheet. Or you can do what I'm going to do, which is we're going to scoop our cookies. And then once they're all scooped, we're going to sprinkle them on top before they go in the oven. So you have, again, as many options as you want. You can put them in and then put them on top at the same time. Say whatever you want to do. So now, and you might have noticed at the beginning, or if you weren't here in the beginning, you will now know that I have not preheated my oven. It is like working towards 90 degrees today already. It's very warm. We have both our air conditioners on in this apartment, and it's still warm in here. So I am not about to add more heat than I need to into my apartment. We are going to scoop these cookies now. So as long as it takes to scoop these is about as long as it takes for an oven to preheat. So you can go ahead and preheat your oven now to 350 degrees, which is your pretty standard baking time. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And then this is another place where you get to be creative and be like, and channel your inner creativity and do whatever you want to do. I'm going to use a cookie scoop or hey, Abby, I'm loving this too. I'm so glad you're enjoying. I'm going to use a cookie scoop. Again, I'm a spoonie. I don't like to make more work for myself if I don't have to. Hi, Melanie. And so I'm going to use a cookie scoop. You can use a spoon. You can use your hands. You can use, a spatula, whatever you want to use for as many cookies as you want to make. If you want to make 6 huge cookies, go for it. It's going to take a little longer to bake, but you can make you can make a big cookie. You can make like a cookie cake. You can just push it all into a pan and make a square like tray bake. And then when they come out, just cut them up. Or you can make regular shaped cookies, which is what I'm going to do. So we're going to scoop and plop. And probably like what most recipes are going to suggest is that you use a tablespoon. So you can definitely do that too. Like just your regular, like on your little spoons, there's this tablespoon. You can use this, which I definitely have used. If you're going to make cookies like this though, like with the scoop, or a spoon. You do want them to be about the same size. Otherwise, when you put them in the oven, you're going to have some cookies that get done faster, and then that's how you burn things. Because you're waiting for all of them to cook, and then the smaller ones are going to burn while you're waiting for the bigger ones to finish cooking. If you want to make a couple really big cookies, ooh. Excuse me. Ooh. I don't know where that came from. If you want to make a couple of big cookies and then some little ones, you can use 2 different baking sheets. And then just bake them separately. Whew. Oh, also, I probably should have said this at the beginning, but I am using a cookie sheet with a silicone mat on it. You can use a cookie sheet with baking parchment on it, or just grease your cookie sheet. You don't want your cookies to stick to the sheet. Hi, Abby's son. I'm so glad you're enjoying it. Yay. I am going to drink some more water. Got a little tickle in my throat this morning. All right. So we're going to scoop. Oh, I'm almost done scooping my cookies. And you want to put them like, they're going to spread a little bit. They're not going to spread a lot. So you can put them pretty close together. You can see my, ta-da. And really, if they touch, it doesn't really matter. Like, who's going to be upset about touching cookies? You can just cut them apart or break them apart or eat 2. Okay. Whew. So I'm almost done here. Oh, and something that Pastor Hannah and I talked about, if you are baking along with us, and I hope there's at least a couple of you baking along with us, go ahead and put your stuff on social media, put it on Facebook, put it on Instagram, and tag it with hashtag UVC Pride Cookies, so that we can see it. Because I really want to see what you make, because you get to see what I made, but I don't get to see what you're making. So I've got just about 1 cookie left here. And so this recipe makes like about 20. Hi, Beatrice. I see you also saying hi. So let's see. I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Yeah. So I have 18 cookies. You're probably going to get about 20 to 24, depending on how big you're making them, or 2 if you're making them really big. And I had a little bit of cookie dough left over, so I'm just adding it to a couple that looked a little bit smaller. All right. And so now we have our cookies, and so these are nice and round because I used my scoop, and so I'm just going to flatten them a little bit with my hand so that when I put the sprinkles on, they stay. So you're going to have some squished cookies, and then I'm going to put some sprinkles on. And if you dip them rather than pouring them, they are going to like keep their shape a little bit more. They're not going to spread as much, which is one reason why I'm sprinkling rather than dipping. But that's fine. Like, again, they're just going to be rounder and they'll still taste delicious, and no one's going to be upset that you have round cookies with pride flags on them. All right. So here are my cookies. See, I got sprinkles on them, and we are gonna, and the sprinkles that are on this baking mat might burn a little bit. They might melt a little bit. I don't really know. I've never actually done this, but I know it'll work, so it'll be fun. We'll learn together. So now my cookies are all ready. And hopefully your cookies are ready too. And I haven't heard my oven ding yet. So does anybody have any questions? Anybody have any problems with working out that recipe before we put them in the oven? And then we're going to chat while these are in the oven. So any baking related questions, any baking questions about these cookies before we put them in the oven? We're going to wait a little bit.
Something is steaming.
Yeah, it's fine. So, okay. I'm not seeing any questions. So we are going to put our cookies in the oven. And if your oven is not quite preheated, that is okay. It's going to come up to temperature probably pretty quickly after we put these in. My oven is steaming a little bit behind me because I made a pie the other day and it spilled on the bottom of the oven. So pay no attention to the steam behind me. So we're going to go in the oven. And you really want them on the middle rack if you have, but any rack is really fine. If it's close to the bottom, just be careful because your bottom of your cookies might burn. So you want to make sure that you have it up in the middle or even up towards the top is better than down by the bottom. And we're going to set a timer for 13 minutes for my oven. And so this is something with cookies. A lot of times, an oven won't be like completely like actually like 350. It might be like 355 or 345. So it might take a little longer or a little less time, depending on the temperature of your oven. So we're going to go with 13 minutes, and then check them. So I'm going to go with 13 minutes. Start. And it's going to take anywhere from like 13 to 15 minutes probably. And that's going to depend again, like on your oven and how crispy you want your cookies. Because if you really like, hi Hannah, if you really like crispy, crunchy, chocolate chip cookies, you're going to leave them in for a little bit longer. If you like really soft, gooey cookies, you're going to take them out right at 13, maybe even 12 minutes. So, and now Hannah's with us.
I hope everybody has some cookies in the oven. And if you have any questions about church, I saw some folks asking about where we're going to have worship the next couple weeks. We've got answers on that, or about baking, or for Red as a human being, because this is your chance to get to know them. We're going to talk a little bit about the spirituality of baking now and can take any questions as you have them. So thank you so much for this, Red. This was so cool and fun to watch.
Yeah, it is fun.
Yeah. And one thing that I'll show everybody what I just showed you before we began, which is if anybody follows me on Instagram, you know that baking is also a big part of my kind of life and spiritual practice. I have no expertise in it, but it comforts me. And particularly in this pandemic has kept me centered. I have a 3-year-old. He's not this small. I don't know why that's... He is smaller than me. A 3-year-old who's obsessed with baking and cooking. And so this weekend we made a matcha custard pie. So that's green tea. That's supposed to be green. Nobody worry that I'm feeding my building poison. And a strawberry rhubarb pie. And one of the things that I really love about baking that I was thinking about the whole time you were giving the recipe is how you do substitute ingredients and practices based on just what's there in the kitchen or what you have or how much time you have or what you can actually do. And as someone who's sort of a recovering like American perfectionist, all things must be good and productive and make you money or make you better or make you optimized. Baking is a real practice for me of like using what is there to make whatever happens, and then what is. What comes out at the end of the bake is what happened, and we accept that and we're joyful about it. And that to me is like one of the things I need to learn about the Holy Spirit the most in all the other parts of my life. So doing it in baking really helps me. Yeah. And I wonder for you, like what has been the part of baking that helps it be centering or joyful or whatever for you? How does that operate in your life?
Oh yeah, I made notes because like this is such a huge part of my life. Anybody who like and like there's a good part of UVC that like knows me and knows that like this is my thing, this is my jam, right? So like for me, baking is like baked pun intended, baked into my like DNA. My mother was a baker. She owned her own bakery for 20 years. My grandmother was a baker. She was a home baker, but she was like, you know, like a Great British Baking Show home baker, like where like, you know, she was doing experiments and stuff in her kitchen, even though, you know, she never did it professionally. Again, like talking about like not monetizing it. It was a part of our family and a way of life. And so I literally grew up in a bake shop. I grew up watching my mother create things for other people and the joy that it brought them. And then also in my family, always food was always a part of every family gathering. And now I think probably a lot of you know, like my mom just passed away in December, and baking for me now is very therapeutic because it connects me to my family, right? Like it connects me to all of those memories and to also to like the things that my mom taught me. And it helps me to like be rooted in my body, where like a lot of times, you know, and in pandemic, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. Like I, you know, have had times where I'm all up in here and I'm not really functioning in my body. I'm not really functioning in my relationship with God. I'm just in my head, spinning out and spinning down. And baking is something that you have to use both your hands, and you have to use, you know, you have to use your like your being to create something else. And so for me, it really connects me to the space that I'm in, and it makes space for me to have something predictable, something that I know that like when I got these ingredients out this morning and I knew the result was going to be cookies at the end. Like that is really comforting to me. And when everything feels really unpredictable, that can be such a space where like, especially if it's a recipe, it doesn't matter if it's like boxed mac and cheese or like a cake mix. Like if you've made something before and it brings you joy, like you can take that and know what's going to happen in that space for that 15, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. And that opens, like for me, it opens up my creativity. It opens up my connection with God in that creativity, because the Holy Spirit is all about creativity and all about moving. And also to the thoughts that I push away that can like float back in while I'm doing this practice. And then also in the giving, you know, like food is made to be shared. And it's made to be given, and it creates community in a really wonderful way. And we see that all through scripture. We see Jesus breaking bread with his disciples. We see him, you know, making food for 5,000 people, for 4,000 people, for more than that, because they didn't count the women. And so like, you know, it's just an opportunity to bring people together and to remember that we are all human, that we are all, you know, beautifully and wonderfully made. And I love that, like, when we see these pictures of these cookies, they're all going to look different, and they're all going to be wonderful, and they're all going to taste great, and they're all going to taste different, a little different, because you're using different ingredients than I am. And I think that's a beautiful picture of like the body of Christ. Like that's a beautiful picture of the church. And Mindy, I love your comment. Yes. Like, boxed mac and cheese can definitely be spiritual. Absolutely. And chocolate chip cookies are definitely a spiritual thing. I agree. I think.
Well, and something I think about a lot, I love that you right, like Jesus broke bread and there's the loaves and the fishes. Food is all over the biblical witness, and particularly like Jesus's story of how he met people. But we don't as much think about the preparation of the food always. I don't know if anybody else watches this. One of my favorite TV shows is Black Lady Sketch Show. It just, everything that comes out of it is hilarious. And they did a sketch a couple weeks ago that was like the women's table at the back of the Last Supper, basically. It just so no one gets scandalized by their pastor recommending them. It has some blue language in it. Your mileage may vary, but I found it very amusing and funny. And right, like that is the wonderful thing about reading the stories of Jesus, is that we have what the stories are, and we then get to fill in the edges because we know that he was an incarnated person who lived a full life. His story was not just the moments we see, but all the moments around it. And so it's not just the bread that he breaks, it's that somebody that he knew like made that bread, right? This is not an advanced market economy where like the bread was shipped in from 3 countries over. Like someone he knew made that bread. The people in that room shared that bread together. Maybe it was a little burned, maybe it was a little underdone, maybe, you know, like, and that was a part of their spiritual practice. I also think it's why we can lose a little bit of how these sorts of domestic labors can be spiritual practices today, is because for so long they were things we needed to be freed from. I think often about Mary and Martha, right? That like, we think of that story as like a busy person and a person who's centered on the love of Jesus. For those who don't know, it's the story of two sisters, one of whom is in the kitchen, busy preparing the home for Jesus, and one of whom is showing him practical devotion, right? Who's not committed to domestic labor, but is devoting herself to him in front. And Martha's kind of mad, right? Like, why isn't Mary helping me get everything ready? And Jesus said, like, I'm not here forever. This devotion is good. When Jesus did that, that was really an act of freeing Martha from what would have been her entire life. Her life would have been domestic labor all the time, 20 hours a day. And he was saying, I'm bringing forth a new system where that doesn't have to be your entire life. Like, your faith and your commitments and your devotion are also a part of who you are. And now we've come around to the opposite, I think, where people, part of them thinks of baking and cooking as like frivolous or extra, when in fact, all of us need to eat every day, right? Like the one thing we're always going to need to do and need to think about, and finding a way to have God, in your food production, or in like when you make an order on the phone. If you're just never going to be a chef, thinking about where God is in the food you eat is really an important practice, I think. Pastor Emily has a beautiful prayer that I can't remember that her family does every night, that prays for the food, but also for the farmers who made this food, for the truck drivers who brought this food to our grocery store, for the labor act, right? Like, for all the people involved in this food, I give thanks. And making food yourself can like help you remember all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes me think about too is, like, as a vegan, as someone, my sister has severe food allergies. I have very beloved people in my life who have severe food allergies. And one of the things that is really magical about baking and cooking is that when you do it yourself, you have control over those ingredients. And so, like, it's a way that people can be, like, feel seen and loved in a way that, like, and it's true, like, if you go to the store and you find something that, like, that person can eat and you bring it to a party, that is also another way of someone being seen and known. And that's what Jesus was all about. And that was what, like, that's what Christianity in its practical application today can really look like. And, you know, in this Pride Month, like, we think about, you know, giving voice to those of us that don't always have voice or don't always have representation. And you can do that through food too. And you can do it in a way that, like, shows people, like, hey, I love you and you're worth me putting in this little bit of extra effort so that you can have what I have. And I think it really, like, meets that need and shows that love in such a practical, tangible way. And in reality, like, you guys just saw, like, it took us, like, and that me voicing everything that I did took us like half an hour to make cookies. Like, it doesn't take that much longer to make something from scratch, and it's easy. Like, it is something that you can do. And if you don't feel like you can do it, contact me and I will walk you through it again. Like, I would happily teach you to make anything that I know how to make. I will teach you how to make it. And that, for me, is a practice of hospitality. It's a practice of love. And I think, you know, it's something that, like, also gives us, there's so many ways that we can connect with each other through the food that we eat, because we all have to eat food. And Abby, yes, food allergy moms are the best moms. Like, my mom, when my sister was diagnosed with her food allergies, so my sister is allergic to all animal protein and gluten, which makes her vegan and gluten-free by default. And so when my mom, like, she did the same, she stepped up, and, like, because those are the moms, you guys are the ones that, like, have to do the work if nobody else is going to do it. And because, you know, a mom's heart is a special thing, and it's something, you know, a parent's heart is something that, like, is always going to go that extra mile. And I love to be able to do that too. And to show people that love. So yeah, I think it just you know, it's a way to connect to community in a really practical, tangible way that, like, just brings so much joy. I don't know anybody that's ever been upset that I brought them a cupcake.
Yeah. And talking about that way that food knits us together and can be a representation of our inclusive values at Urban Village. Our right, our values are to be bold, inclusive, and relevant. We say that every Sunday. If you want to hear more, there's a banner on the bottom. Fill out the Connect card. One thing that Red does that you haven't talked about yet, Red, is Red and Lola and a couple of other folks, when we are in person, so this will be starting again in just a couple weeks, bake bread weekly to be our bread that is vegan and gluten-free, so that when we say one bread, one body, it can be true. Right? At a lot of places, you have a couple different kinds of bread, but at least at our Wicker Park site, there's this one bread, one body that everybody can eat. And one of the things we always say during communion is like, if you're allergic to applesauce, right, or like one of the ingredients of this bread, let us know. And that, I think, to some people can seem like silly or overkill. But then to the people for whom that has never happened before, I have seen people cry when they come up and they say, like, this is the first time I've been able to take communion with everybody else, you know?
Yeah.
And it's something that I didn't understand the value of until I met the first person who was like, oh my gosh, I'm like taking communion with people. And it's such an act of love that you and Lola, another brick of the community, like make in making that. And if anyone would ever like to bake the bread, you let us know. I also think that's where part of this connection is, you know, today is like baking worship, but it's also pride. All month, we're going to have some special kind of LGBTQ related activities here at Urban Village. We're going to have a Juneteenth Black and Queer Pride celebration, the third week of June, the last week of June, Latinx Pride. We're going to be having some different worship and fellowship activities. This afternoon, we've got Kiki at the beach at Osterman Beach at 1 p.m. if you just want to show up and like be on the beach and have fun with folks. But one thing about all of that is that one of the most powerful things about Jesus Christ to me is that Jesus sort of commands us to go to the edges and the margins of whatever communities we're a part of and to take on that struggle, that task, that experience, to extend our boundaries of where we think Jesus can be and who Jesus is. And it's not just about doing that for whichever group is on the edge from your position. It's that it then changes you. Like, I've had so many cis straight people say, after a queer inclusive worship, I learned something about my own gender presentation that I could finally like accept and feel good about for the first time. Or I'm divorced and I actually felt like I was safe in this community for the first time. And it's the same with the bread, right? We extend it to every person who has an allergy. And then the people who don't learn something new about what it is to be extended and to be a Christ-like including community. So this Pride, there's lots of cool stuff going on. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm just going to say that my cookies weren't quite done and I put them in for 2 more minutes. So it's been 15 minutes since you put your cookies in the oven if you were tracking with us, which means they're probably done.
Check them. It's cookie check time.
It's cookie check time. And I'm just, yes, these are done. So I'm just going to say that, like, it took me forever. I had such a learning curve on cookies because I would be like, oh, they're not brown enough. Oh, they're not this enough. Like, take them out of the oven. They do not need more than 15 minutes. And they will be like lightly brown, and they're going to keep cooking on this cookie sheet because it's still 350 degrees. So unless you like crispy cookies, but even if you do, they're probably done. So my cookies are done.
Things keep cooking after they come out of the oven was also very perplexing to me, Red. You need to like minus a couple minutes of what you want it to look like because it's going to keep being hot and keep cooking.
Especially if they're small and thin like your cookies are. Like, you're not, if you did what I said and you're making like a tray bake, if you smushed it all into one giant cookie, it's probably going to take longer. Other than that, if you made regular cookies, even if you made big ones, they're probably done. And like I said, nobody's going to be upset about a gooey cookie that falls apart. Nobody's upset about that. Trust me, you will be upset if you burn them. Yes. Yes, you will be upset if you burn them. So my cookies are done, and I'm going to turn my oven off, which is the other thing that I'm terrible at doing, is when I'm done baking, I just leave the kitchen and leave the oven on. So we're going to turn that off and let these bad boys cool so we can eat them. If you're feeling more spicy and you want more Pride on your cookies, you can put more sprinkles on them while they're still warm and they will stick. If you wait, they will not stick. You can also, if you have like frosting. If you have a jar of frosting in your pantry, you can slap some of that on there and then put more sprinkles on them. Wait until they cool off though, because otherwise they'll just melt right off. And you could even like make sandwich cookies. Take 2 chocolate chip cookies and put frosting between them, smush them together. I bet your kiddos would like that if you have kiddos, or if you're just, somebody who loves baked good like I am. I will say for myself, I just love a regular chocolate chip cookie. And, with sprinkles, because everything's better with sprinkles.
Beautiful. Any last questions from everybody? Thoughts? Ways that baking and cooking have been important to you? I'm being reminded just seeing my necklace on the monitor. I wear a St. Francis de Sales necklace often, if no one's read his work. He was a medieval priest who wrote a lot about bloom where you're planted. He said, like, a lot of people try and change their external circumstances all the time, seeking spiritual centeredness and health. But it turns out this is also a great thing that AA and NA teach people. Wherever you go, there you are, right? And so, like, sometimes we need to, it's about internal transformation and the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And that, for me, is a lot of baking and cooking, too, is like, what I have can I turn into something delicious or nutritious or just something new and different?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been so much fun. I have loved chatting with Hannah. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you for all coming to my kitchen. And I can't wait to see your cookies. I will post my cookies on Facebook and Instagram, and I will hopefully see all of you sometime soon. Happy Pride!
Yeah, happy Pride. We want to give a big thank you to Red. So everybody clap. Yay. Everybody write YouTube, Food Network. If Red doesn't have a cooking show by the end of the summer, we riot. And if you would like to get connected to UVC, if this is your first time here, please fill out that connect card at bit.ly/UVC Connect. We'd love to get to know you better. If you'd like to give to the Ministry of Urban Village to help us do what we do, you can go to urbanvillagechurch.org and hit give. We also have a brand new website. So if you're an old UVC head, you've been around here for 11 years, but you just want to see the snazzy new website and all the stuff, go ahead over to urbanvillagechurch.org. We are grateful for you. We are grateful for Pride. We are grateful for Red, and we want to see your cookies. So post them at UVC Pride Cookies. Bye, everybody.